You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You can also come over and see the simulcast in video and join the live chat room. We're inhabited by all the Intrepids that join this show every night over on my YouTube channel. And that is youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. I hope that you had a good day today. It's starting to get hot and humid up here. Not as hot as it was last week, but it's a little up and down. You know, it's harder to be in the sun when it's oppressive feeling outside. But we get those opposites up here in the Great White North. We get frozen wasteland in the winter with 20 below zero temps Fahrenheit. And then we get just the opposite. We get 100 degrees and high humidities and dew points in the summer. So the springs, falls, autumns, I mean, to die for up here. Absolutely gorgeous. But right now, it's beautiful outside, but it's hot and humid. So I hope it was good where you were. That's enough weather talk for today. How are you doing with all this racial tension stuff that is going on right now in our country? To say that it is a non-issue would be to be dismissive. It is an issue, and it is an issue for some people out there, especially people of color. And however, the opinion on that amongst people of color varies as much as it does anywhere else on any other topic. You've got some who will say, don't gauge me by the color of my skin. And others who say skin color is the determinant as to whether or not you are being oppressed in this country. If you are white, you are born into some kind of privilege. If you are black or brown-skinned, you are looked at by systemic racism in this country. This country, of course, I'm referring to the United States. And maybe they will say globally, if you are born black or brown-skinned, that you are somehow considered to be less viable, less privileged. And so growing up here and having opportunity here is rare, harder to find. You got to fight harder, and you've got to get there against a system that is stacked against you by we white folk. And I'm about as white as they come. I'm very British Isles in heritage. A bit of Scandinavian in there. Thank you, Vikings. And so as I used to say, I come from a mixed heritage. My mom was white, and my dad was very white. So I'm about as white as they come, and so white at days I am transparent in the middle of winter. However, having said that, I get told repeatedly by one political point of view that I'm a privileged person because I'm white, and that I just don't understand how privileged I am. I even took a little test. There was a video I saw that Paula Stucci, how you doing, Paula? That Paula Stucci sent me a couple of weeks ago that showed, and I may have mentioned this before, I know we've talked about it on the Situation Room, but a bunch of kids lined up, high school age kids, and a coach was having them all race. And he said, I've got a $100 bill in my hand. Whoever wins this race gets the $100 bill. And then he says, but there's a few conditions for this test, or for this race. He says, first, he said, I'm going to ask all those of you who had both parents at home all your life, take a step forward. Foomp. A big bunch of them took a step forward. Now all of you who had a mom and a dad who was in the home, take another step forward, and a few more took a step forward. And there's still people back on the line. Then he talked about if you had your college paid for, step forward. If you had never had to worry about where your next meal came from, step forward. And he asked all these questions, 8 or 9 questions, I think it was. And you've got this, now this field looks very different. He says, now we'll have this race. And what you saw was on the back line were all the black kids. And all the white kids in varying degrees along the steps forward. And he was trying to illustrate this is what white privilege is. And I said, when I looked at that video, I said, I got one of those questions. I would have had one step ahead of somebody else by those questions. Because we experience all, and the one that I had was we never went hungry. And the rest of those, I paid for my own college. Nobody paid for me. I didn't get a scholarship. My mom couldn't pay for me. I didn't have both parents in the home. I didn't have a dad that I knew until I was 30. And so all of those things that were considered to be white privilege, me as one of the whitest kids in the room, only had one of them. We didn't go hungry. And as far as we knew, our mom kept us fed. You had a young mom in her 20s who had 3 kids, and she was single, and she worked as a waitress in a day and age when the wage was about $1.85 to $2 an hour, plus tips. And she brought us up on that, and thank God we had a grandfather who helped her out. And, we grew up on pot pies and TV dinners. And, my mom was a fantastic chef, but she couldn't do that for her 3 kids at home. She was constantly working. She went to school, too, to try to get her schooling done so she could get an education. And, she does well now, but when we were growing up, we were poor folk. And, but we were still white privileged because of the color of our skin. We apparently had some kind of privilege over somebody else. And I'll tell you, I've struggled every step of the way to get where I am. The only thing that has, and I don't mean this in a braggadocious way, the only thing that has helped me is the fact that I have artistic talent. If I didn't have that talent, I might be working somewhere else. But that artistic talent is the thing that carried me through. And a lot of my jobs that I got, they required certain degrees. I didn't have all my degrees. I went to 5 years of post-high school education, but I never graduated from anywhere. As most of you know, I went to college for 2.5 years, dropped out. Then I was recruited by our seminary that was being built out of our church. And I went to seminary there where they were tutoring me in the balance of my bachelor's degree while I worked on my master's. And after 2 years there, I dropped out and went into advertising and moved across country and took a job as an art director. And so because of my talent, my abilities that I was born with, I was able to pull myself forward. Otherwise, I don't know, who knows, I might be a preacher nowadays. I might be something totally different. I don't know what. So I fight against the politicization of privilege, because I believe it varies from person to person. White privilege, you have to dig in, and I'm not doing a treatise on racism or on privilege or anything like that. I will tell you, though, I get awfully tired of hearing how privileged I am. And that I am, even my own daughters, who are very liberally minded, progressive, leftist, they describe me to their friends as, well, my dad, he's a loving dad. He's the best dad anyone could ever have. But, he doesn't quite understand what privilege means in our generation. And I'm like, I don't know about any of you listening out there, but I'm a 59-year-old male. There's a hell of a lot of stuff I understand. And I'm not so backwater in my, oh my God, I was born 30 years before my daughter, so I just don't get it. I don't get what racism means. I don't get what privilege is. I don't get things politically. And I fight against that notion a bit. And my own son, my son Sam, he is dating a black girl. African American girl, and she puts up awful lot of posts that are very far to the left, and this whole racism issue and all of that. And I look at that, and I look at some of the posts she puts up and some of the memes she posts, and I say, that is a logical fallacy you're posting, or that's a false equivalency you're putting up. I said, this is why Rocky Stucci and I very often talk about utilizing common sense as opposed to a political agenda. I like to work agenda-free, and I like to think I apply common sense. Maybe sometimes the only bias I have is the bias against not using common sense, but adhering to a more or less political agenda. I have a problem with that. And so that's the way I talk to her. And one of my older daughters, came in and said, well, why are you always trying to shoot down her messages? My son's girlfriend, shoot down her messages. And why don't you, if you only knew her story, why don't you support her story? And I said, well, I would love to hear her story. I don't know it all. I've had a few conversations, and she's a sweetheart. She's a lovely girl. I'm happy for my son. But at the same time, I don't know her backstory. But I say it doesn't matter what your backstory is. If you're going to use a meme in social media to describe your plight or your situation, and that meme happens to be a false equivalency or erroneous, then you're using the wrong stuff to support your cause. Support your cause by who you are and what you are. And so I said, in response, I would love to hear her stories. Tell me, I said. Now, she's only an 18-year-old girl. So I would love to know what her experience. I know some of her life, but I'd love to know her experiences as a black person fighting white privilege. I haven't heard any of those yet. And so let's take that and set that aside. All of this stuff comes up in the weirdest of ways. There are so many things that I got to go over to my social media here, and I'm going to call something up. There's something I posted yesterday that, oh, and by the way, if you've seen some of the memes, like with Morgan Freeman, and where he's saying things like, I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history. There is no White History Month. The only way to end racism is to stop talking about it, he said. And I agree with him. The things you give life to are the things that exist. We already know that. The things you manifest are the things that are. Now, we ended slavery in this country 150 years ago. And so what we're trying to be taught is that it's the systemic oppression that have come against a race that we once enslaved. And that we white privileged people don't get that. And I insist that I grew up in the middle of the civil rights movement. I was a kid in the 60s. I wasn't a teenager till the 70s, but I grew up in the middle of all of that. I had black friends. I had Native American friends. Some of my closest friends were the Native American brothers down the street. And by the way, which both of them found me out a couple of years ago on Facebook. I had looked for them a couple of times, couldn't find them. And then one of the brothers found me and on Facebook. And then the other guy found me as well, the other brother, Charlie and Delano. And so they're both friends of mine on my Facebook page. Might even be listening tonight. We did everything together. And you know what? Race was never a factor. I thought it was cool that they were Indians because I wanted to know what it was like to be Indian. And, they told me stuff that they knew and stuff they didn't know. And, we were just kids. We all got along. Nobody was different from anybody else. I had a couple of black friends from school. And I didn't understand what it meant to have a black experience versus a white experience. So that's the way I grew up. And I know I watched the Morgan Freeman video, which has been making the circuit, where back 5 years ago he was on Don Lemon's show on CNN. And Don Lemon was really trying to push the racist agenda of America. And he says, do you feel that economics today for black America, it's all about racism, and whatever the question was structured like that? And Morgan Freeman's answer was, today? He said, no. And he stopped right there, and Don Lemon was kind of like, didn't expect that answer from him. He said, and then Freeman went on to say, look at you and me. He says, we're prime examples. He says that we are not inhibited from getting ahead because of our color of our skin. He said, do we have our struggles on the way? Yeah. He says, but it's all about what you put your mind to and what object you have in your vision to say, I'm going to reach that. And he says, when you start throwing in race, and I'm so oppressed by my race that I can't get to my goal, he says, you're defeating yourself. And he's right. And I paraphrased him there. And I've said this before too. I've grown up in times in America where I've worked for black CEOs. I've had black people I've worked with that were making just as much money as me or more in the advertising business. I've had black judges I've seen. We have black local representatives in our state government. We have black senators to Congress, black members of the House in Congress. We have a black Supreme Court justice. We have had a black president. And so all of these things, you look at all of this and all the in-betweens up along the way, I'm saying there's not a lot of inhibition. It's all about what you set your mind to do. And so, and you can get into the minutia of saying, why is there a black college fund for kids? A mind is a terrible thing to waste, but there's not a black college fund for whites. Well, they will say, yes, there is. It's the standard system of scholarships and so on and all of that. Well, okay, I get that. I understand that. But we've singled out black America as somebody that deserves something special. And this has been going on for as long as I have been alive. So 50 to 60 years this has been going on and building. And they're still oppressed today, according to some people on the political side of that issue. I don't see it. I don't see the oppression because I see nothing but equality. Do I notice the color of people's skin? Yeah. When we say we operate being colorblind, that's how I operate. I am experiential. There's experience, and there is, how would you divide this up? Daily experience, the visceral, the daily stuff, versus the state and the true. If you look at it as a linear line, the state and true is that I operate on a colorblind level, meaning race doesn't matter to me. Never has. It's never been an issue for me. Experientially, I can notice somebody's of color. Are they Mexican? Are they Indian? Are they Native American? Are they black? Are they Chinese? Korean? Yeah, you notice those things. So what? We're supposed to be a country that's a boiling pot to glory in our diversity. Yet if you mention that diversity, then all of a sudden you're singling them out. I've been called more times, even in the last week, I'm just an old white guy from Wisconsin. And old white guy. And I had somebody who was being a social justice warrior, an SJW, somebody who said that. Yeah, well, you're just an old white guy or a middle-aged white guy. So I was in a discussion with some people about that. And I said, you do realize that by singling me out and lumping me into a category as an old white guy, that you're actually being hypocritical. You're going against what you say you are doing. Number one, you're saying, I'm white, I'm old, I'm a guy. What are those three things when you start to gauge somebody by those criteria? I'm old, ageism. I'm white, racism. I'm a guy, sexism. So, the people that were spouting off about white privilege, and they're generally white people that are talking about, oh, I'm so sad about my white privilege that I was raised in white privilege. But then they're talking about the old white guys. I think the meme I saw by somebody that I know very well said something about, I'm not afraid to go into a room full of Muslims. I'm not afraid to go into a room full of gay people, or LGBTQ, I think they said. I'm not afraid to go into a room full of black people, but I sure am afraid to go into a room filled with middle-aged white guys. And what they weren't saying was, and I assumed, I just chalked it up to having heard the same person talk about middle-aged or old white guys before, and that women will rise to the top. I saw it as a woman's issue, and I said, I says, you're operating under ageism, sexism, and racism. And then everybody started coming in and just lambasting me. Don't you know this is about abuse? She's afraid of the abuse of middle-aged white men who would sexually harass her. I said, oh, okay. I said, I didn't know that's what the argument was about or what the meme was about. I said, but on that topic, you're saying all middle-aged white guys are rapists or sexual harassers? I said, isn't that an overgeneralization? I said, you don't want us to, you lionize somebody like, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, George Floyd, who was a lifetime criminal, and you push all of that aside. You don't lump him in with criminals. Yet, because somebody was harassed, maybe that you know, and I asked them, I said, how many of you here have been harassed sexually by a middle-aged white guy? And of course, that's a wide open question, because harassment can be as much as, hey, you look nice today. I didn't welcome that comment. You're harassing me. So it's gone from sexual harassment to the suggestion that you can even talk to the opposite sex with a smile on your face, and it turns into sexual harassment. So however you define sexual harassment. So anyway, on that topic, I was a white old guy. So ageism, sexism, and racism were okay as long as it wasn't targeted against a person of color. And so I say there is an hypocrisy in all of this at a base level. And this is why I say, don't operate under that stuff. You got to operate under common sense. Common sense. And then I saw a meme, and I see we're already closing in on the end of the first segment, but I posted this meme yesterday, and this is the topic of the whole show, on Jesus. An academic friend of mine put this up, and I was shocked that this person would put this up. It shows a picture of Jesus, and there's a little black girl, very cute. She's got a pink dress on, holding a doll, holding Jesus' hand. And she said, Jesus, why are you white? And the answer was, in the meme, because I'm a psychological tool. By creating the image of a white God, this subliminally ingrains the myth of white superiority into the subconscious minds of people of color. This makes you people more compliant with our white dominance over your lives. And I looked at that meme and I bristled a bit. And I put that up, and I didn't name this person. Some people might know who it is. But it's a well-known academic. It's been on television shows, had shows of their own, authored books. I've interviewed this person on my radio show a few years ago. And I said that an academic friend of mine, whom I greatly respect for their work, just posted this meme on their Instagram. And I was shocked that someone who's such a good thinker in so many other ways could actually espouse and proliferate such racist swill. Excuse me. For someone who's an historian, such as my friend, they should be well acquainted with the anthropology of religious art throughout history. And then I went on and I talked about that. So we're going to talk about that specifically when we come back. Hang on. We're not going to get too much more into the whole political side of this, but I want to talk about this thing about Jesus being white. Was he white? Shocker. Let's find out when we come back.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're back with the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you can also come over and watch the video simulcast of this and join the live chat room with the other Intrepids going on right now as we're talking over on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. All right, we're talking about this whole thing. We didn't get into it until the last 2 minutes of the first segment because I was laying a bit of a foundation. But this whole idea of, and does it matter, first of all, I have to ask, this idea that Jesus is white and that the church has presented him as white down through the ages to send the subliminal message that he is somehow superior to the brown-skinned peoples of the world. Now, maybe there are some that do that. Maybe the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, has pictures of the white-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus hanging in their lodge halls. Maybe the Nazis who supported Christianity, supported a white supremacist Jesus. I'm not saying pockets of those people don't exist. And as you know with this show, things that we've talked about months and months and months is the fact that the original story of Jesus is different from what the Bible presents. Christianity, is different from what the Bible presents to what we experience today. That first 200 years after the death of Jesus, you had a huge transformation in the story. Was Jesus part of a Gnostic mythology? Was he a real person who was attributed certain things to make him into one of the more mystic gods that existed at the time? And so there's a lot of question about that, about the teachings and so on. But getting down to the history of the man, first of all, I believe he existed. I don't think there's any reason to believe he didn't exist. There's enough written evidence about him from his day, meaning his times into the 1st and 2nd century, that seemed to substantiate that he was a guy who walked the earth, that he had an impact of some kind. You've got some scholars will say that, he didn't exist. He was made up because he was a nobody at the time. It was his movement that made him somebody special, his following after the fact. He had no archaeological impact, is what they're trying to say. And so I wanted to go through that precisely and talk about this. I want to talk about, what did Jesus really look like? Was he a white guy? I have said in some of my posts where I talk about this, that same post I read from for you, with the meme where I showed the meme that my academician friend put up. And I said that I believe Jesus really existed. I said, but I believe that the artists that you're talking about down through the ages, the Christian artists in the Byzantine era, in the medieval times, and into the Renaissance, they painted from within their paradigm. When I was a kid, if I were to draw a picture of Jesus, he'd have been a white guy. Why? Because that's the way I understood things. That's the way they understood things in the Middle Ages. I made a point with somebody this morning, and I said, if you look at the way that medieval artists and Byzantine artists painted Jesus and biblical stories and biblical personages, to Michelangelo, and all of these artists, if they weren't just painted in flowing robes and beards, they were painted in clothing of the times. You look at medieval paintings and shows them in, almost like the tights and the, and the hats with the feathers in them and doublets and things like that, which is not how they dressed in first century Judea. But they didn't know that. They didn't have the historical information that we have. They were painting and creating art and statuary and all of that from within their own paradigm, their own understanding. And so that's why you could have black cultures that adhered to Christianity that showed Jesus as a black person. They painted and created from within their own paradigm. So novelists, script writers, casting directors have piqued our interest in this. Jesus may have been one of the best known and most talked about people of ancient history, but what did Jesus look like? Now, I get a magazine, the Biblical Archaeology Review, and I've referred to it before. And biblical archaeology doesn't mean that that the magazine and the organization is all about the biblical faith. They're about archaeology of things that happen in the Bible. And you've got people of faith, Jewish, Christian, that work for them. Archaeologists are the same way, but they want to find out what existed, what was it like. And so in the Biblical Archaeology Review article called Painting a Portrait of Jesus, D. Moody Smith examined the difficulties in answering this question. Many ancient accounts of a person's life give us a hint of the person's physical appearance. For example, the Old Testament tells us that King David, that he was ruddy, meaning he had, reddish skin. He was not flushed, not blushed. What's the word? Ruddy. He was healthy looking and vital looking and had that coloration to his skin, and that he was handsome. And it said he had beautiful eyes, the Bible tells us. So we got to look at what he looked like. But the New Testament never goes near the question, what did Jesus look like? The only thing we know that we can tell from his appearance was that he was bearded, because it said during the crucifixion process, when he was being beaten and mocked, that they ripped the beard out of his face. So you can't rip out a beard that doesn't exist. I had one of my teachers in high school, when I went to a Bible high school, a biblical high school with a church, and he was of this is back during the anti-hippie movement and no long hair. Jesus had short hair because that's what Christians do. And they don't wear beards because Christians don't wear beards because it's too much like the hippie. And I said, I'll bet you Jesus didn't wear jeans either. And I got in trouble for saying that, but we got into a little friendly discussion with the teacher, and he said, he says Jesus didn't have facial hair. I said, well, what do you do about this verse where it says they pulled the beard out of his face? Well, that was the stubble. He had stubble. I said, he hadn't shaved for a few days. And I said, have you ever gone 3 days without shaving? Could you grab a clump of hair and pull it out of your face? No. Look at me right now, folks. This is 2 days without shaving here. And that's all it does. Give me 2 more days and it won't look much different. So, excuses. So, now Smith pointed out in his article that we don't know much about the personal life of Jesus. We're given some insight into his family. And the Gospel's name is Mother, obviously, Virgin Mary. And his brothers, including James, who became the leader of the first century church in Jerusalem. And they mention unnamed sisters. The book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 45, refers to Jesus as son of Joseph. Though after nativity narratives, Joseph isn't mentioned as a player. You never hear anything. Have you noticed that in the Jesus story? After the nativity, after the birth of Jesus, you never hear of Joseph again, except when Jesus is in his 30s. And the townspeople go, hey, isn't this the carpenter's son? He's never a player. You never see him again. You never hear from him again. You never see interaction again. So some of Jesus' followers were women, including Mary Magdalene. The Gospel of John implies a close relationship, including her role in the resurrection story. Was Mary Magdalene the wife of Jesus? That was depicted in Nikos Kazantzakis. Remember his film, The Last Temptation of Christ, where Willem Dafoe played Jesus? That wasn't the first time that was put forward, but that was in a film. Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code in his book and the subsequent movie. Jewish men would have been married, but it seems not likely for Jesus' contemporary John the Baptist. And the Apostle Paul writes that he was single, so Jesus being single and celibate might have been very possible, because Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist. And so, was Jesus married? I've written about this before. We've talked about this before. I believe he was. He was a Jewish rabbi. He was considered a rabbi, a teacher. And a Jewish rabbi, to be considered worth their salt in Israel in the first century, and really even today, needed to be a married man. And so I believe, like the wedding at Cana, when you see that in the story in the Bible, this is Jesus' first miracle of his public ministry, was turning the water into wine at the wedding at Cana. I believe it was his wedding. There's lots of reasons why. We could get into that. We've gotten into it before. We don't need to get into it tonight. But I believe that was his marriage, his wedding. So in the Roman catacombs, we see our first representations of Jesus. But could they in Rome know the answer to the question, what did Jesus really look like? There he was depicted as a beardless shepherd. And by the 4th century, Jesus is shown with a beard, as often we see him represented today. Since ancient times, gaps in Jesus' story have prompted writers to imagine stories. The infancy gospel of Thomas tells us of a child Jesus creating birds out of clay. The gospel of Judas gives a positive take on Jesus' relationship to Judas Iscariot. We've talked about that before. D. Moody Smith asks in his article, Painting a Portrait of Jesus, did any of these writers give us a clearer answer to the question? What did Jesus really look like? Not really. You just have to imagine that. Now we've had some, I'm going to show you some pictures. And those of you who are listening on audio only on the radio, you're going to miss some of this. Sorry for the imagery. You can come and look at it anytime over at my YouTube page in the archives. But let me show you a couple of pictures of depictions of what I think Jesus may have looked like. First thing we know of any certainty is that Jesus was Jewish. He was a Jew. He was born to a Jewish woman who was also an Israelite. They lived in Judea, which was Israel. And Jesus is born to this mother. He grew up in Judea. He was a kid in Israel. He was an Israelite kid. He could name his tribe, his Jewish tribe. And this is who Jesus was. So, what did he look like? Well, the questions would be, let's go back and find out, what did Judeans look like in the first century? Jewish Judeans. And there are a couple of things that have come up. Now, these are more specifically tied to other things, but I'm going to show you a picture. These are from the Fayum mummy paintings. Now, you can see here I've put up a bunch of pictures. Look at this art is probably a lot more realistic than you might be familiar with in ancient art. Now, these are all from about the 1st and 2nd century A.D., after the time of Jesus. And these all depict Egyptians and Israelites or Judeans at the time of Semitic people, at the time of Jesus, within 100 years of his death. And this is how they're depicted. And these funerary or funeral Sorry, I've got this naggy cough that you know I have, and I don't have a mute button here. These are mummy paintings. They were mummified in Egypt, which is just to the south of Israel. You go down to the south into the Negev, and you're already into the outskirts of Egypt. And so these are from mummies of the time in the 1st century A.D., and they would do these very intricate, detailed paintings of the mummy, and they were almost like death masks. And they would put these paintings on boards that covered the face of the mummy. And these were the people depicted. And you can see pretty much right there, within 100 years of the time of Jesus, the way things looked, the hairstyles they had, the beard styles they had, the color of the skin. There's only one guy in this whole lot that looks a bit darker than the other guys. And you can see, and I'm referring to the guy who's on the top row, second from the right. You can see he's darker complected. But you look at his features and you say, is he African? Is he black in the sense of what we understand black to be? Or is he Semitic, Arabic looking, Middle Eastern? So all of these people you can see here are Middle Eastern people, and these were portraits from the times of what these people looked like. So when you're looking at these faces, these hairstyles, except for the women that are depicted, the two on the ends on the lower side, when you're looking at this and you are seeing the hairstyles, the beard styles, the skin color, the tonation, all of that, you're seeing what people looked like in Judea and Egypt in the 1st century A.D., after the time of Christ. So that's one of the first ideas that we have of what these people looked like and what Jesus may have looked like. And then you've also got, here's a couple of faces of Jesus. First, I'm going to show you this one. This is interesting. It's really hard to see. This was discovered in Haifa not long ago. And the picture on the left is the painting. The picture on the right is a tracing of the painting. So now if you look at the two vertical black lines that are running up on the left side of the picture, you can see those same black lines over on the right where they did the tracing. So you can kind of line the image up a little bit. You can see where the eye socket is and the mouth and the shadow under the chin, things like that. And you can see in the color side. But this is what Jesus looked like on the walls of Haifa. This is in Israel. This is the first depiction of Jesus Christ found in Israel, and it's from the 6th century it dates back to. So about 500 years after the death of Christ. And even that's a long time. Especially, we're so locked into what we know today and how we gauge things today with the internet and with books in the library and all of that. Back then, they didn't have that information. It was word of mouth, and it was art like this was the only thing. So they show a beardless Jesus who had curly hair. And is that what he looked like? If you go back to this picture from Fayum, look at the hairstyles of all the men. Guy in the upper left, the guy next to him, curly hair, kind of this curly, it's not like an afro curly, but it's like the in-between stages of from white, think of typical white hair, straight, to an afro hair. And this is Semitic. They're darker skinned. They've got the somewhat more curly hair. You find that in a lot of these. You see the guys that are more Roman influenced, that have the really tightly shorn hair. You see the beards were kind of scraggly looking. And that's the way they looked. They didn't do a lot of trimming, it seems, although there was with the beards. But you do have the longer pointed beards that you see in a lot of art from the day. So, all of that to say, there's no way to talk about this stuff without being a bit stereotypical, but this is how Jewish men would have looked in Jesus' day. So he probably had this kind of look about him. Then you've got this picture. Let me show you this one. Now, here's a couple that we're very familiar with. The picture on the left is a reconstruction that was done to show what Jesus may have looked like. Not what he did look like, because nobody knows. There's no original to go after. But there took many composites of men, of skeletal remains, of hold on. Wow. Sorry about that, radio listeners. Little sneeze. My allergies are really up. I got the dry throat and the coughing and the sneezing all the time. So anyway, pardon that little bit of humanity. The guy on the left is a reconstruction from composites made of men that would have lived in around the time that Jesus lived. Now, to me, I look at this guy and I go, I reject that. He's too stocky. He's too, he looks like a plumber. He doesn't look like a savior. Well, of course, then you go to the biblical narrative, which talks about Jesus not being anything special to look at. But that was based on a prophecy that said, and the Son of Man will be somebody that is not pleasant to the eye, meaning he wasn't a King David who was ruddy complected and muscular and had beautiful eyes. But the prophecy talks about somebody that's nothing to really look at. Is that a physical prophecy that has relevance, or is that a spiritual prophecy? So this is the guy on the left that they say Jesus very well could have looked just like this guy. He could have been stocky. You ever thought about that? Now, Jesus, being an itinerant rabbi, wandered around. They were eating corn off the stalks out of the fields one day because they were hungry. They're probably all fairly lean, would be my guess. But this guy you're seeing here is stocky build. Now, the guy on the right in this picture, this is the 3D face that was constructed from the information they pulled off the Shroud of Turin. Now, we see a very different depiction, but remember, when you look at a flattened Shroud of Turin, you see a face where the shroud would have peaked over the nose and things like that. So the face, when it's laid flat, is a bit distorted. So they took and they compensated for all that, and they built this. This is the image that you get. And people say, well, that can't be Jesus. He looks like all the movies and the painting. Well, I think all the paintings down through the ages were based on original concepts of what Jesus looked like. There's actually a Byzantine painting that shows a face of Jesus that looks very much like this one on the right. And across his throat, you see a kind of a slash, and there's a slash painted in, not a cut. It's just a white slash that's put across. And when you look at the Shroud of Turin, you see that same slash in the garment, in the folds in the garment. And that dates back to the Byzantine era. So somewhere in the 300 to 500s AD, you've got a painting of Jesus that was obviously, very obviously, based on the Shroud of Turin. They even included the fold in the fabric across the throat. But he looked like this guy. So, I don't know. We'll do a show on the Shroud of Turin sometimes. I know Barry Schwartz, who was the one of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory scientists that went in and did the original photographing of the Shroud back in the late 70s. And he was a Jewish man. And he went in and he said, I've figured free trip to Italy. I'm joining the JPL team, do some photography. We'll debunk this shroud in the first 15 minutes, and we'll go party in Italy. And he said, one thing he noticed was that, he says, within the first 30 seconds, he says, I looked at this garment, or this shroud, and one thing I could tell you is that it wasn't fake. What it was, I didn't know, but it wasn't fake. It wasn't painted. They look into the microns deep of the pigmentation, all that. We'll get into that some other time. Maybe even have Barry Schwartz on the show. And we'll talk about the shroud. But this is the image from the shroud. No, but even Barry says, I don't know if this is Jesus. He says, I'm just telling you what I know about the shroud. And he's delivered. He's got the site shroud.com. You can go there and see all the information over there. But this is the image off the shroud. And so the big question comes in. Is one of these faces here what Jesus really looked like? I don't know. And nobody knows for sure. So that's my face. So we're back to that. Sorry, those of you in radio who couldn't see that. So we're awash in Jesus fiction. It isn't surprising that Jesus is the best known figure of history, but in many ways, he's also the least known. We don't know much about him. And this makes a great subject for novelists and movie makers. But most ancient bioi, the Greek plural for the word for life, like modern biographies, bioi, describe the subject's appearance. Even Old Testament descriptions of David, as we already mentioned, talk about David's physical attractiveness. I think that was part of the apologetic about David. Now, maybe he was a good-looking guy, but they wanted to make sure that everybody knew he was a good-looking guy. But the Gospels contain no reference to Jesus' appearance, much less a description of him. We don't even know what he looked like. And the strange omission in this conforms to New Testament depiction of Jesus generally. We're told little of his personal life or his relationships. The one exception is his family, his mother, his brothers, his sister figures. In the gospel story, his brother James, who hadn't been a follower, evidently claimed to have seen the risen Jesus. And James then became a major leader in the earliest church. And he wrote the book of James in the New Testament. But Joseph does not appear at all during Jesus' ministry. And Jesus is rarely called the son of Joseph, which you find in John 1:45. They call him the son of Joseph because he was legally the son of Joseph. And from antiquity, it's been inferred that Joseph had died long before Jesus' ministry began. And this is fairly possible. Although we're not told in the New Testament itself. Joseph is simply absent, and he's an abstract figure. We don't know much about him. We don't learn anything about Jesus' relationship with women, other than that women were amongst his followers. Prominent among them was Mary Magdalene. We talked about her. She's outside the tomb when he was risen from the dead, and this touching scene with Mary presupposes a close relationship not otherwise revealed in the Gospels. Was their relationship an intimate one? Did Jesus beget progeny by her? Did he have kids? That he did is the thesis of the popular novel by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code. And the ostensible facts about Jesus revealed in the course of the book's narrative are actually fictitious. The view that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene had already been suggested in lots of other sources prior to this. And so, of course, any normal Jewish man would have been married. But then the question comes in, was Jesus normal? In fact, it's improbable on strictly historical grounds. But I think that there is an alternative, those of you who follow my Facebook page, an alternative theory that I believe he was married to Mary. And now, guess what? We're out of time. And I didn't cover all the information. I don't know where we'll go tomorrow. We'll either go back to talking about the mystical dreams and finish that off, or we'll come back to this and talk more about this. We'll see what the reaction is to today's show. And all we know for sure is that Jesus wasn't a white dude, but he also probably wasn't a black dude either. He was a Middle Eastern Jewish man, bred, yeah, I guess God came down, in Canaan, and lived in Judea. So he's probably, that darker olive skin, black hair, curly to some extent, and so on. So there you go, folks. That's all I got for us today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Use your thinking brains and your thinking caps. We'll see you tomorrow, 23 hours from now. Sit tight.